Mao Zedong. In the final years of his life, Mao Zedong's health was failing. A heavy smoker, his declining health was a closely guarded secret by the Chinese government. It was revealed that he battled a variety of serious illnesses, including heart and lung issues, and possibly Parkinson's disease and ALS, though those remain unconfirmed. In 1976, Mao's condition worsened significantly. He suffered a heart attack in March, another in late June, and a third on September 2nd that left him completely incapacitated. He never recovered and died a week later on September 9th, 1976, at the age of 82. When his embalmed body was displayed to the public, 1 million people filed past to pay their respects. Despite Mao's request to be cremated, that request was disregarded. Instead, his body was permanently placed on display in a mausoleum so that the Chinese people could continue to honor him. Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro, the Cuban revolutionary leader who led the country for nearly 5 decades, also faced health challenges in his later years. In 2006, Castro underwent emergency intestinal surgery and temporarily ceded power to his brother, Raul Castro. Although he initially recovered, his health remained a subject of speculation for several years. He gradually withdrew from public life, focusing on writing and meeting with foreign dignitaries. On February 19, 2008, he officially resigned as president of Cuba, formally transferring power to Raul Castro. In his later years, Castro continued to write extensively on global issues and occasionally made public appearances. Fidel Castro died on November 25, 2016, at the age of 90. His death marked the end of an era in Cuban history and sparked mixed reactions both in Cuba and around the world. Adolf Hitler. By early 1945, the world of Adolf Hitler was crumbling. The Soviet Red Army was advancing from the east, while the Western Allies pressed from the west, and Germany itself was in ruins. Yet Hitler refused to surrender, clinging to increasingly unrealistic hopes, such as launching a surprise counterattack in the Ardennes or relying on the US and Britain to suddenly turn against the Soviets after the death of Roosevelt in April. None of these strategies bore fruit. On April 20th, his 56th birthday, Hitler made one final public appearance above ground in the Reich Chancellery Garden, awarding medals to teenage soldiers from the Hitler Youth. This was his last glimpse of daylight. The Soviets were rapidly closing in, and by April 23rd, Berlin was completely encircled. During the following week, Hitler remained secluded in the Führer bunker, his underground command center. Reports from the front lines were disastrous. His military leaders were either defying orders, fleeing, or, like Himmler and Göring, attempting to negotiate a surrender behind his back. Feeling betrayed, Hitler had Himmler declared a traitor and removed Göring from power. On the night of April 28th, he married his longtime companion, Eva Braun, in a brief civil ceremony inside the bunker. The next day, he learned that Mussolini had been captured and executed by Italian partisans. Determined to avoid the same fate, Hitler on April 30th, 1945, with Soviet troops just 1,640 feet away, took his own life by shooting himself in the head. Eva Braun bit into a cyanide capsule. In accordance with his instructions, their bodies were carried up to the garden, doused in gasoline, and set on fire as artillery shells exploded nearby. Josip Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda chief, briefly took over but committed suicide the next day. Berlin surrendered on May 2nd. Hitler's dental remains were the only positively identified pieces, and it wasn't until 1956 that a German court officially issued a death certificate for him. Ngô Đình Diệm. By mid-1963, South Vietnam was engulfed in a crisis. The government's suppression of Buddhists under Ngô Đình Diệm had ignited widespread protests, and discontent was rapidly growing among both the civilian population and the military. Behind the scenes, a group of South Vietnamese generals, with the backing of the U.S. Embassy, began plotting a coup. The plan was primarily orchestrated by General Duong Văn Minh, with support from other high-ranking military officers. A crucial element was the secret assurance from the U.S. government, delivered through CIA officer Lucian Konin, that the United States would not intervene to protect Diem. This provided the plotters with the confidence to proceed. On November 1st, 1963, the coup commenced. Diem and his brother, Ngo Dinh Nhu, initially held out in the presidential palace, but by evening they had escaped through a hidden tunnel and sought refuge in a Catholic church in Cho Lon. The following morning, November 2nd, South Vietnamese soldiers discovered the brothers and took them into custody. During their transport in the back of an armored personnel carrier, they were assassinated by Captain Nguyen Van Hong, allegedly acting under the direct orders of General Min. Diem was shot and stabbed, and his body was later buried in an unmarked grave. The assassination shocked North Vietnam. President Ho Chi Minh reportedly stated, "I can scarcely believe the Americans would be so stupid," and believed that the assassination would destabilize the South for years to come. Muammar Gaddafi. Following the outbreak of protests in Libya in February 2011, as part of the broader Arab Spring uprisings, Muammar Gaddafi responded with force. His government characterized the opposition as extremists, accusing them of being under foreign influence. Despite efforts to quell tensions through food subsidies and limited prisoner releases, protests continued to spread, particularly in the east. When the military opened fire on protesters, support for Gaddafi began to erode. Segments of the army and government defected, and eastern cities, including Benghazi, fell under rebel control. In response, the National Transitional Council, NTC, was established to represent opposition forces. The situation escalated into a civil war, with both sides accused of human rights abuses. In March, the UN authorized a no-fly zone enforced by NATO to prevent air attacks on civilians. Several countries, including France, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, provided support to the rebels. NATO airstrikes played a critical role in shifting the balance of power, and over time, the NTC forces with air support advanced westward. In August, they captured Tripoli, and by October, only a few cities remained under Gaddafi's control, including Sirte, where he had sought refuge. On October 20th, 2011, Gaddafi attempted to flee Sirte in a convoy, but it was struck by a NATO airstrike. He survived the strike and hid in a drainage pipe nearby, where he was eventually captured by rebel fighters. During his capture, he was beaten and wounded. While the official explanation stated that he was killed in crossfire, other accounts suggest he may have been shot after being captured. Gaddafi's body was later displayed in Misrata, and on October the 25th, he was buried in an undisclosed desert location. Park Chung-hee. By the late 1970s, South Korea's President Park Chung-hee was experiencing a decline in public support. While his early years were marked by strong economic growth, his increasingly authoritarian rule, especially under the Yushin Constitution, caused growing unrest. The Yushin Constitution was a highly authoritarian document that significantly expanded the powers of the president. South Koreans were increasingly frustrated by strict limitations on freedom of speech, a powerful and feared security agency, the KCIA, and widespread arrests without trial. This discontent led to escalating protests in October 1979, particularly in Busan and Masan, where thousands of students and workers clashed with police, prompting the imposition of martial law in certain areas of the country. Just days after these protests, on October the 26th, 1979, Park was having dinner with Kim Jae-gyu, the director of the KCIA, at a government safe house in Seoul. Without warning, Kim shot Park in the head and chest. Other KCIA agents assisted by killing members of Park's security detail elsewhere in the building. When questioned about his motives, Kim claimed he acted out of patriotism, stating that Park was obstructing democratic progress. Kim was subsequently tortured, put on trial, and executed in May 1980. Park's death triggered a power vacuum. Choi Kyu-ha became acting president, but Chun Doo-hwan quickly seized control of the military and intelligence services. By 1980, Chun had effectively taken over the government in another military coup. Anastasio Somoza Debayle. By the late 1970s, Anastasio Somoza Debayle, the ruler of Nicaragua, held immense power in Central America, yet he was also one of the most widely opposed figures. Opposition primarily came from the Sandinista National Liberation Front. After a series of escalating crises, including a devastating earthquake in 1972, accusations of corruption, and a violent crackdown on protesters, the opposition gained significant strength. In July 1979, with armed Sandinista forces advancing and U.S. support withdrawn under President Jimmy Carter, Somoza resigned and fled the country. He initially went to Miami but was denied asylum in the United States and eventually settled in Paraguay, which was then under the dictatorship of Alfredo Stroessner. A little over a year later, on September the 17th, 1980, a 7-person Sandinista commando team, in an operation dubbed Operation Reptile, ambushed his vehicle on Avenida España. The team had spent over 6 months preparing, tracking his movements and meticulously planning the attack. As Somoza drove past the ambush site, the team attempted to strike his car with an RPG-7. The first shot misfired, but the second hit the vehicle directly. Somoza was killed instantly, along with his driver and financial advisor. Reports indicated that his body was so badly burned that he was identified through his feet. Some later accounts suggested that Cuban intelligence played a role in planning the assassination, given Somoza's long history of opposing Fidel Castro's regime. Josip Broz Tito. In the final years of his life, Josip Broz Tito began to gradually withdraw from the daily responsibilities of governing Yugoslavia. After 1974, he delegated more responsibilities to the prime minister, though he still retained ultimate authority on all significant decisions. However, by 1979, his health took a serious turn for the worse. He experienced circulation problems in his legs and was admitted twice in January 1980 to a hospital in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Doctors determined that his left leg needed amputation due to blocked arteries. Tito initially refused the amputation. His personal aide recounted that Tito threatened suicide if anyone dared to remove his leg, prompting them to hide his pistol out of concern he might act on his threat. Eventually, after a private conversation with his sons, Tito relented and the leg was amputated. Unfortunately, it was too late. The infection had already spread. On May 4th, 1980, Tito died at the age of 87. His death was a significant event, drawing leaders from 129 countries to his funeral. This constituted the largest state funeral at the time, with kings, presidents, and prime ministers from both sides of the Cold War attending. Augusto Pinochet. On the morning of December 3, 2006, Augusto Pinochet, Chile's former dictator, suffered a heart attack. His house arrest was lifted, and on December 10th, Pinochet was rushed to the intensive care unit. Just a few hours later, he died from congestive heart failure and pulmonary edema. He was 91 years old and surrounded by his family in the military hospital of Santiago. The news was met with deeply divided reactions in Santiago. Thousands of people flooded the streets, some to celebrate, others to mourn. His body was laid out the next day at the military academy, but even then, the events were not peaceful. Francisco Cuadrado Prats, the grandson of a general murdered under Pinochet's regime, spat on the coffin and was subsequently beaten by enraged supporters.
I don't think you'll be able to click on the next video until time runs out. 3, 2, 1, you're lost.